Good morning and welcome to Jew in the Pew, the YouTube channel on YouTube and wherever good podcasts are to be found. And this morning I'm very privileged to be able to interview two of the relatives of Anton Ehrhardt, who was born on the 14th of May and just a few days ago now. But I'm very glad to welcome Pat Ehrhardt, his daughter-in-law, and Penny Ehrhardt, his granddaughter. And if you've seen the blog post which was posted, you'll realize that Anton Ehrhardt was born on the 14th of May 1909, passed on the 18th of February 1964, and was a very significant German lawyer and academic scholar of law, and also a British theologian. And as we've got two of his relatives here this morning, I'd just love them to introduce themselves and how they're related to Anton Ehrhardt, and then I'll ask them a few questions about him and about the family characteristics. So let me begin with Pat. Would you like to just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, I'm Pat Ehrhardt. I'm the widow of Chris Erhardt, who was the eldest son of Arnold. And Chris died about 20 years ago, unfortunately, at a similar age to the age at which his father died, actually, in his early 60s. And I knew Arnold when he was quite old, well, so 55 onwards, probably.
Yeah.
I'd met Chris when we were both university students at though he was at Oxford and I was at Kiel. And I stayed with them quite often and had quite a soft spot, and I think this was reciprocated for Arnold. Always seemed to me a very important sort of person.
Yeah. Let me come back to you in a few moments, Pat, and ask you if there are any particular things you remember about him, as well as that soft spot and his prominence as a person. Let me come to Penny. Penny, would you like to introduce yourself and say how you're related?
Yes, sure. So my name's Penny Erhardt. So Pat and Chris Erhardt are my parents. So Arnold Ehrhardt was my grandfather, and he died a few years before I was born, so I never had the pleasure of knowing him directly. I guess my grandmother, or Großmutter, Edith Erhardt, although we didn't see a lot of her, was quite a prominent figure in our family life, despite being in different sides of the world. And I've had some interest, I think, in the whole story of Arnold and Edith and them escaping from Germany with their children, and also had some interest in hearing a little bit more about Arnold's work. So I'm delighted to participate in the interview and learn more about him and pass on anything that I can for you.
Thank you. And Penny, tell us what you do for a living and how that's connected with Arnold's own background.
Oh, sure. So, well, I'm largely a policy consultant, but I'm also doing my doctorate in human rights law at Oxford currently, and I'm a researcher and writer on actually some religious social movements and human rights legal themes. So that's something I do see as a common thread and with Arnold, both the law side and the interest in justice and human rights and the wider meaning of the world questions.
Thank you. Yeah, one of the things that struck me when I was researching Arnold was he seems to have this brilliant legal mind, but also a human face to it. So having a passion for justice, but also an awareness of the plight of those who, like his people and himself, had to suffer persecution and deprivation of their rights. So I'm really interested in what he was like as a person. And Pat, can I come back to you and ask you again how you got to how you had a feel for his personality and his character, and if there are any particular things you remembered about him?
Well, I think one of the things I remember is that people who knew him, mainly people who had met him through church, always said how easy he was to get on with and how easy to talk to he was. When he was first ordained, he went to a parish in a very poor part of Manchester, and in one of the old, large, cold, underfinanced vicarages that the Anglican Church was full of. And he was a very sort of hands-on person there, as was his wife. This was in the days when a vicar's wife was just about a job, and his wife was sort of preside at the teapots and run the girl guides and things like that. Moved later to a smaller and in a slightly better socio-economic area of Manchester, but still made a very good connection with his congregation. It's funny that although everybody said how easy he was to talk to, my husband's view was completely different. He always found his father a bit remote and somebody he respected, but didn't really feel he knew very well. There were 5 children. The first 3 were girls, and then there was Chris. And then later, when they were in Manchester, Chris's younger brother was born as Peter. And I get very different impressions of Arnold Ehrhardt from the different children. Margaret, the second daughter, I think was probably the one that was closest to him and talked to him a lot. As I say, Chris always found him a slightly awe-inspiring character, and didn't have a very close relationship, although he had enormous respect for his father. He was more likely to talk to his siblings or his mother than his father. When I knew him, he spent most of his time in his study, which was a very nice book-lined room in a fairly large house. And I never remember him sort of being involved with family doings. I never remembered him going shopping or carrying things around or doing any gardening, or he would just sat in his study. He smoked, and he very much enjoyed smoking in company, so that after I had a short time when I smoked, and after that I still went on smoking because he so much enjoyed company over a cigarette. The same thing I think happened with one of his daughters who smoked when he was there, because he so much enjoyed sharing things. And he had a Wedgwood biscuit barrel, which was always full of biscuits, and he was very hospitable. When someone visited him in his room, he would always offer the biscuits around. Yeah,
that really brings him alive for me, Pat, and I'm sure for our listeners and viewers. And I think what I notice also is this balance in his character between a very serious academic scholar who must have spent a lot of time in the study just to write the
Oh,
amazing
yes.
number of books and articles he produced, and somebody who had a very personal touch with those in the churches where he was ministering to, but also somebody who had an inner life that is really what I try to work out for myself about his own background and experiences and character. Penny, how do you see him? I know you didn't know him personally, but what traits and characteristics do you think he's passed on?
I think there is a family thing. I mean, obviously looking at the Jewish and the German and the, I guess, Judaic and Christian sides, I think there's sort of some cultural, possibly stereotypes, but possibly, you know, truths in this case for him, that in terms of being very intellectually curious and committed to scholarship, and also rigorous in his approach. Those are things that I gather, and fairly very logical. I think my grandparents' view of what happened in Germany in the 1930s was it was an aberration from an excess of being too modern and giving way to romantic, foolish romantic notions that could have been avoided with more thought, which I know is different from some other people who opposed the Nazis. And some other historians might characterize Nazism differently, but to them it was that that whole cult of the leader, the charismatic leader, all of that stuff was a scary lack of rationality. And more careful consideration was what was kind of needed, and a deeper sense of duty to avoid this. I think a couple of other things. I gather Arnold's parents were very important in who they became. So actually, when I was
This
at high
was
school, I had to write
Oskar, the surgeon you're talking about.
Oskar and Martha.
Yeah.
Yes. I had to do a bit of write a family history when I was at high school. And I went back through the family Bible, and there was a story about, I think it's Martha's father, that at school, so he was of Jewish ethnicity and a practicing Jew, or I certainly religiously identifying Jew. And he came home, at school one day, the school teacher, the schoolmaster had made some sort of anti-Semitic comment, and this boy, in an absolute rage at it, had picked up his Greek grammar text and thrown it at the schoolmaster. And the result, according to the record, is that when he told his dad said he wasn't going to buy him another Greek grammar text and he had to leave school. And he went off and became a successful merchant, which sort of contains several sort of those threads of story that I find quite interesting.
Because of course your grandfather was a Greek scholar and a Jewish disciple of Jesus.
Yes, and so Martha's family was Jewish. I think in somewhere that apparently Oskar may have also had Jewish ethnicity, although that's not something I'd heard growing up. Certainly Martha converted to Christianity by the time she married Oskar. So Arnold was brought up in a Christian family, Arnold and his siblings, and that was obviously an important part of who the siblings were. It's interesting that they took this, because of the circumstances they found themselves, were all involved in the anti-fascist movement, and all ended up having to flee Germany, and all from a Christian perspective, whereas the parents stayed in Germany and survived the war in Germany. Arnold's relationship with his brother Rudolf, I think, is quite key. His brother became a minister and studied theology before Arnold did, whereas, as you've already noted, it was only after being forced out of his job as a law lecturer that Arnold went and studied theology. So the influence of his brother, I think, was quite key in helping him form his ideas.
Yes.
If you would you like me to fill in the little bits of historical background that I?
Oh, please do. Yes. Yeah.
So other stories that I've heard. So he was studying in, if you've got with, he was studying in Basel, and the family were living across the border in Germany.
Yeah.
And there was, so he married Edith Hahn, and she was a very intelligent woman in her own right, a mathematician, who also knew ancient Greek, and also was probably, I don't know if she would have considered herself a theologian, but deeply interested in theological matters, but was also busy bringing up 4 and then 5 children as well. And certainly I heard stories of Edith smuggling documents across the Swiss-German border. So, and on one occasion, accidentally dropping those documents in front of the border guard. And then the story went that she had the presence of mind to not get flustered and bend down and pick them up, but allow the guard to pick them up and hand them back to her, because it wouldn't be ladylike and would have raised suspicion if she'd reached down for them. Yeah. So I've never known what those documents were, but that was some of what they were involved with.
Well, that's fascinating, because in the memoir that I put in the blog post, it also talks about how Arnold was also stopped by the border guards, and when he was also bringing in secret documents really to help Jews escape from Germany. I think this was the basis. And all the guards could find was a Greek New Testament and a Hebrew grammar or something, and they let him through. So I think maybe both Arnold and his wife were taking risks with their own safety to help Jewish people escape. And yeah, that's wonderful. Any other comments or recollections that you'd like to share with us, either Pat or Penny?
So I think another thing, and Mum might be able to speak more on this, there's a British minister and later bishop, George Bell, who was instrumental in getting ministers of Jewish descent out of Germany. And that's how Arnold and his family got out of Germany and got accepted into England. Yeah. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but the story I've heard is that that's why he put so much into being a parish priest, was he felt that he owed a debt to the Church of England for having brought him out.
In the memoir that I put, it says that it was Bishop George Bell of Chichester, who of course was a collaborator with Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Karl Barth and others, who helped many, especially Jewish Christian ministers and theologians, escape and come to England. And in the bio it says that Anton came to live in Wadhurst, which is a nice south of England, Sussex, fairly nice affluent region, and then did his PhD at Cambridge doing theology, and then came up to Manchester. I've put quite a lot about George Bell in other blogs, so I will pick up on that story.
Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add? Carry on. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. And then in Manchester, was it Birch that he was at first, Mum, before he went to Haywood? We were talking about the large.
Birch in Rusholme.
Yes, and that was a very working class parish.
Yes.
And I think he would have had to work hard to make sure that his ministry and his preaching especially was relevant to the people there. But again, everybody loved him. So I think he was a very popular minister.
Yeah, he was very good at sort of getting down to people's level without being patronizing or supercilious about it. I can always remember that there's a booklet we have that he wrote, which was headed "The Christian Housewife's Sunday Joint." And it was about how, you know, the Christians' Sunday became the important day, and the sort of theological significance of the Christian Housewife's Sunday Joint. Yeah. Very interesting.
I'd love to see a copy, because the only books by him that I know are the high academic ones on Greek philosophy and the history of the church. So If you wrote a book
Oh,
on the Christian housewife's Sunday joint, that would be great.
yeah, I think it's only a paper, but
Yeah,
rather than a book. But yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
yeah. One final question to you both, and then I think we'll round off. How have you personally benefited from his life and his legacy? Has the Jewish side, the Christian side, the legal side, the minister side come through, or how do you see yourselves as benefiting from his life and legacy?
In my case, the sense of family, that the whole Erhardt family is very much more connected than my maternal family, or in fact, most people in England, they keep in touch, and still today keep in touch. Sort of visit occasionally, have these great parties from time to time if somebody has a significant date to celebrate. And I sort of feel I know the Erhardt family, probably much more than I know my own birth family.
Yeah.
Just because everybody, family is important, and I can even hear one of my sisters-in-law's voice when I say that, hearing Meg say, family is important, or we do it because we're family.
Yeah.
So this was a very strong thing.
Oh, that's great. And a very typically Jewish value that we place on family, I think.
Yes.
Yeah. How about yourself, Penny?
Well, that's really interesting. I think interestingly, I'd almost say exactly the opposite, because here in New Zealand, you often say, hear people say family comes first. It's a much more family-oriented, extended family-oriented place than the UK in my experience. Whereas I think for me, there is you must do what is right, even if it means upsetting family, which, so that, beyond anything else, you must do what is right. When the chips are down, would you do what is right? The other thing, though, that the family point raised for me is, I think the multiple identities, and of course it's quite a big thing now, and with the surname Erhardt, I know that my father and his family in Manchester, during the war, obviously got teased for having German accents and a German name. And even today, occasionally you get comments. You can get comments as a German, and then comments, if you choose to take them on, comments about Jews. And I think that being able to hold the multiple identities, for me, I actually a practicing Buddhist. So having been raised in the Church of England, I think that the importance of working out what you think and respecting others for what they stand for, and that people are going to hold quite strong beliefs, but you can still discuss those, would be an important thing. After the war, Edith and Arnold traced Edith's 3 nephews in Germany. They weren't particularly interested in Edith's sister and brother-in-law, who were actively supportive of the German regime, but they wanted to make sure the nephews were okay. And I think gives a sense of the importance of family, that they actually brought I believe he was the eldest, Sven, out to England to live with the family, partly because Germany was such a mess. So to give him a better life and give the parents a break, an economic break for a bit. But also I think it was showed an amazing rebuilding of family, that despite the 2 sisters, Arnold's wife and sister-in-law, being on opposite sides of this disastrous conflict, after it was over, they acknowledged each other. And I think that is quite an enduring value.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, both of you. For me, it's a great privilege and a joy to meet the descendants and the relatives of Erhardt. And I I'm sure he would be proud of you and of how you have developed in your own ways as well. Thank you so much for highlighting that sense of family, that sense of justice, that sense of doing what is right and working out your own identity. And for me, when I research these people who often lived many years ago, it's difficult for me to get a sense of who they are, but you've really helped me to see that today, and you've brought it alive. So I'd like to say thank you very much for joining me. I will be doing more research on his brother and on Iwand, the other theologian connected. But I'd like to say on behalf of our listeners and viewers on During the Pew, thank you for joining us for On This Day in Messianic Jewish History.
Oh, it's been an enormous pleasure. Thank you, Richard.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Richard.
So I'm now stopping the recording.